Hi, Soul Risers! Today we will be talking about anxiety and our defenses, or our defense mechanisms to cope with anxiety. The first question we must ask is, what is anxiety? Put simply, anxiety is an emotional state in which one feels worry or concern about the future. Most of the times, time is known to be one of the primary factors that anxiety develops. So, how do we cope with anxiety? In order to answer this question, we have to first understand Freud's topographical and structural model. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, proposed an iceberg analogy of our mind, where he divided our mind into three levels of awareness into the conscious, preconscious, and unconscious, which together are known as the topographical model. Our conscious mind consists of thoughts a person is currently aware of, and it is the most accessible part, just as the tip of the iceberg. Our preconscious mind consists of easily retrievable information, and it's found right beneath the conscious. And lastly, our unconscious consists of thoughts that cannot be easily brought into awareness except under extreme situations, and it is located underwater in the depths of the iceberg, as it is in the depths of our mind. So, Freud also introduced the concepts of the id, ego, and superego, as you could see in this image here, and together they form the structural model. All three of these elements are part of our unconscious mind. The id is the part of the personality that works towards fulfilling pleasure, fulfilling the, the impulses that a person has. The ego, on the other hand, works towards satisfying the id's impulses, but also takes into consideration the realities of the world. Lastly, the superego, it represents society's values and standards. You could say our moral self. And the superego is responsible for helping the id decide what is right and what is wrong. The ego is sort of the center of the id and superego, and it helps balance the two. So, Freud shared that when a conflict arises between either of these three, that's when anxiety strikes. Anxiety was divided into three types by Freud. The first type of anxiety he called reality anxiety or objective anxiety. And this is the type of anxiety that is a response to the perceived threat in the real world. So, if let's say you had an assignment tomorrow and you had not done any of it until tonight, then that would probably make you feel anxious. And this is something that was triggered by an external event. That's why it can be labeled as reality or objective anxiety. On the other hand, neurotic anxiety is experienced when unacceptable id impulses are dangerously close to breaking into consciousness. So, our impulses, our natural desires and wishes, when these don't come into fruition, then it causes neurotic anxiety. Moral anxiety is the third type of anxiety that Freud described. He said that moral anxiety is brought about by the superego in response to the id impulses that violate the superego's strict moral code. So, if the id desired to do something and the superego, which is the good and bad self, said no, it is bad to do that, then the person would start feeling morally anxious. So, what is a defense mechanism? These are techniques of the ego to deal with unwanted thoughts and desires to reduce or avoid anxiety. Most of the times, these techniques or mental processes are usually automatic and function at the unconscious level. So here are some examples of defense mechanisms. There are up to 20 defenses in total that Freud had proposed, but 7 of which are most commonly used. These are few of the several. There's projection, sublimation, repression, regression, rationalization, compensation, identification, displacement, withdrawal, and sympathy. So let's describe and try to deconstruct some of these defense mechanisms. The first one is repression. Repression is an unconscious mechanism employed by our ego to keep disturbing or threatening thoughts from becoming conscious. For example, if you decided that you wanted to hurt someone, but it's something that is almost taboo and inconceivable for you to comprehend, you would purposely cover it up and push it into your unconscious. In other words, repress. The second defense mechanism is known as regression, and regression happens when a person faces such anxiety that it takes them back into acting like a child, and so they can evade responsibility of an adult. The third defense mechanism is displacement, and displacement is when a person satisfies their impulse, let's say aggression, with a substitute object, which is less threatening. So, for example, um, let's say a person's boss screams at the person, and the person comes back home and screams at his dog. So, this is an example of how the person's aggression wasn't directed back to his boss, but he ended up directing it towards something that was less harmful, his dog. The fourth defense mechanism is sublimation. This is similar to displacement, but the person satisfies their impulse with a substitute object that is more socially acceptable. So, let's say a person had a really bad day at work, they would come home and maybe use the punching bag to relieve their anger or stress instead of punching their boss or whoever else made them anxious or stressful that day. Some of the other defense mechanisms include denial, reaction formation, rationalization, and intellectualization. So, denial is used to prevent perception of the source of anxiety. So, instead of accepting that something is making you anxious, you just completely deny that it's not even possible. So, let's say you got rejected by um, someone you love. Instead of accepting that this person may not love you back, you completely deny that it's even possible that that could happen, that you were rejected. There must be something wrong. Next is rationalization. Rationalization and intellectualization is kind of happening more at the conscious level than an unconscious level. And rationalization, as the name says, it's used to create a seemingly logical reason for doing something shameful. So if someone ends up being cruel to someone um, out in the world, then they would rationalize by saying you have to be cruel to be kind, or something like that, to face the anxiety of being cruel. The next is intellectualization, and it is basically when you translate a threatening situation into a cold intellectual um, explanation. So, for example, you could say something like, after a prolonged period of discomfort, the patient expired. So this is an example of intellectualization. You intellectualize the anxious feelings. So you would say, okay, if someone got rejected by someone else, the person would say, okay, it's fine. Everyone gets rejected in this world at some point in their lives, and that's an example of intellectualization. The last but not the least main defense mechanism is reaction formation. And this is quite interesting because it's actually about forming a reaction that's opposite to the true reaction you actually feel. So it protects you against your own forbidden thought or impulses by instigating the opposite. So what this means is, for example, if you really hate someone at school, let's say you really hate your teacher at school, instead of hating them, you would say, I really, really love this person. But in fact, you really don't. But you end up feeling that you love this person because it helps you deal with the anxiety of hating someone. So that's about it, folks. These are the defense mechanisms that are the most common ones that are used to face anxiety, to cope with your anxiety levels. Which ones do you use the most? I would be interested in hearing your thoughts and your responses to this presentation. Please do leave your comments and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thank you.